right. Hopefully everyone can see me and everyone's having a good Friday. We're going to go ahead and get started. And before we do, just a quick announcement. If you are in the YouTube channel, please put any questions that you have into the comments section. And Justin from Women 2.0 is going to take all of the questions, and then during the Q&A, I'm going to allot about 10 to 15 minutes at the end. He'll make sure all the questions, or the vast majority of the questions, get answered. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully everyone will be able to see my screen and the slides as I get started. All right. Okay. Just give me 1 second to share my screen. All right. Oops. Sorry about that. Okay. Sorry, I want to double check because I'm a little bit OCD. So hopefully everyone can see this, and I'm just going to double check with Justin really quickly, and then I'll switch back in 1 second. Okay. Oops. Sorry about that. I know you all can see this. Okay, let's go ahead and do that one more time. And then I'll go ahead and get started. All right. Okay, so hopefully Justin will text me if there's any problems with the screen, but you should all see my screen now. Thanks for your patience. I just want to make sure it's all kind of squared away so that we have a good webinar. So, as you know, the title of this session is How to Transform Your Ideas into Software Products. And just to give you a little bit of background about myself, because some of you might be joining and not know about what this is all about. So I was the founding engineer at Mint.com, and after the acquisition in 2009, decided to strike out on my own, and since then have built a couple products and companies, BizeeBee, which is a CRM solution for fitness businesses, and Femgineer, which originally began as a blog back in 2007, but recently became an education company. And my goal is to get out there and talk to folks like yourself who are interested in building products and building companies. And so what I'm doing today with this webinar is I've actually written a book called How to Transform Your Ideas into Software Products, and I'm going to be launching it at the Women 2.0 conference on September 30th. But in the meantime, I want to share some of the learnings from the book in this webinar. And if you're interested, you can certainly pick up a copy of it when it launches. And in the meantime, I've also got an email course that you can sign up for. It's a 20-week email course, and you can sign up by August 31st. All right? So, when we talk about this topic, there's a lot to cover, which is why, I've written a whole book on it and taught courses on it. What I want to dig into today are really sort of the top 3 areas that I am constantly having people come out and ask me questions on. And truthfully, they are pretty much the top 3 areas that you want to focus on when you're thinking about building a software product. And so those are, attracting customers, getting solid technical talent, whether you are technical or not, and then, of course, funding the product's development itself. So those are the 3 things we're going to cover, and I apologize if you wanted any more information, but I'm going to encourage you to either take my email course or come to the Women 2.0 conference. I'll be speaking more on this topic, or feel free to reach out to me as well. All right? So I want to start off by talking about ideas, right? Because many of you probably right now have an idea, and you're probably doing something along the lines of, deciding whether or not you want to productize it, deciding or not whether or not it's even a good idea, right? So you probably are spending a lot of time judging the validity of your idea. And if you're a little bit farther along, you might decide, well, maybe it's not good enough. Oh, or maybe, no, I've got another idea. Or maybe you've got like 5 ideas and you're trying to pare them all down. And then, deep down inside, you might also feel like, okay, but I don't want to tell anybody my idea because they might steal it. Because there's just, only so many good ideas out there in the world, right? So a lot of times we judge our ideas because they come from us, and we don't necessarily trust our own ideas and the strength of them. Or the second is, even if we, do believe that they're a good idea, then we think they're just so amazing that we don't want to share it because we fear someone might take it and run off with it. And so the couple things that I want to share with you are, it's great to have an idea, but at the end of the day, it's just an idea, right? It's really not even anything concrete. And so we've got to kind of do away with getting too wedded to that idea, and instead we've got to take some action. And so the first is around this theme of thought crime, right? A lot of people worry that a competitor is going to steal their idea, or a co-founder, or even, an advisor or whomever. Well, truthfully, I would encourage you to have them steal it, because the truth is that going and creating an idea is very simple, but executing on it and convincing other people to execute on it takes a long time. And even if you go tell a competitor, they might not even have the bandwidth to pursue your idea. And so what's going to end up happening is that, if your idea is any good, you're going to start executing, and then you are going to be recognized, and someone's going to want to steal it because it's a good idea, right? But that's okay, because you will be in the lead, and they will be the ones following you, right? So you don't have to worry. Remember, think back to all the Groupon clones that happened, all the social networks that kind of copied each other, and so realize that there's always going to be some level of competition and some level of mimicry. We just have to get comfortable with it. But as long as we're the leader, we're the ones that originated the idea, then we're going to be the ones to innovate. So I want everyone to kind of get comfortable with this. Now, once I say that, of course, you want to get out there and share your idea, right? You want to share this with actually as many people as you can. Even competitors can sometimes be helpful, because you might be pursuing a different customer segment, a different product line, or you might just be pursuing something altogether that's very, very different from their direction. And so it's good to kind of understand where they have failed or why they've overlooked certain markets. So it's totally fine to actually talk to competitors, and I would certainly also encourage you to reach out to more folks. Think about advisors, think about potential employees, co-founders, etc. So the key is, at this stage, you want to start sharing your idea. Now, when I say sharing your idea, once again, people get a little bit confused. They start to, just say things like, oh, I've got this thing, and it does this and that. And as they're sharing their idea, people are just really confused. And they oftentimes wonder, like, how can I help this person that's come to me with their idea, right? They're just not sure what to do. And so what I actually encourage you to do is to really narrow down what it is you're trying to do. And I actually have a formula for sharing an idea. And that formula is saying, who is the idea for? What is the specific problem that you're trying to solve? Or it might not even be a problem, it could be an experience. And then in that case, the problem and the solution can go together. And then what's the end benefit that someone's going to get from using your particular idea, right? And when you do this, you have to be very careful that you're not factoring things like form factors, right? So we're not going to say, oh, our product, is an iPhone app or an Android app or a web app or whatever, right? We're talking in generalities of what's the problem or the experience and what the benefit is and who it is for. So I want you all to now, or not now, but at some point in today's day, I want you to take some time to take the idea you have and think about these 4 things and really write it out on paper. Because when you do this, it does a couple things for you. The first is it makes it a lot easier for people to understand what the heck you're doing and then give you some feedback. But second, it also helps you internally understand what it is that you're trying to do. Right? So that's why this is really important. If you've ever come across an entrepreneur who you just like I don't know what they're doing, right? It's probably because they haven't taken the time to really delineate in this kind of formula what it is that they're doing. And even if your idea changes or you get a new one, you want to go back to this formula. You always want to go back to this formula. So keep that in mind. Now, once we've gotten the formula down, it's time to run some experiments. So once you've gotten that, you want to reach out to your network, right? This is always a great place to start because you want to get some feedback from folks who are going to be, kind enough, but also give you some constructive feedback. And you can sort of refine the message itself before you start to do anything else, right? So this is not the time to go out and build. It's not the time to recruit engineers. It's not the time to go fundraise, right? This is the time to say, here's the idea I have. I just want to make sure it makes sense to people that, I think it would apply to. And as you're reaching out, right, because I had you previously say who the idea is for, I want you to also think about who in your network this idea may apply to, or to at least ask them, hey, this is who I think the idea is for. Do you know people like this, right? So, for example, when I was working on BizeeBee, I started off looking for yoga studio owners, and so every yoga person I ran into, be like, who do you know that's a studio owner, or who do you know that's a private instructor, right? So you've really got to start there. And then you want to really bifurcate your approach to growing your market and growing your audience. And so what I mean by that is, a lot of times I see people say like, well, I reached out to like 5 people and no one responded, and I sent them an email. Okay, that's great, but it's not enough. So you want to make sure that you're not just pursuing people online or just offline, right? You've really got to combine the two, and you've got to do a fair amount of legwork here, because this is where you start to recruit your customers, and you're not 100% sure which is going to work, an offline approach or an online approach. And so my sincere suggestion is to go out and try both. Now I want to give you a simple example. So this is my friend Quentin, and Quentin is an engineer and turned entrepreneur, and he's got this product called B&B Flow, which for those of you who use Airbnb or who are hosts of Airbnb, you've probably run into the problem where managing all of the folks that are staying at your place is a little bit cumbersome. There's just a lot of communication that happens, and you can't do it all through Airbnb. So Quentin came up with his own product, and what he decided to do was he decided to actually go online to a meetup group that was dedicated for Airbnb hosts, and he reached out to about 37 of them. He sent them an email and then said, hey, I'm going to be at this particular event, and it would be great to meet up. I have built a solution specifically for folks like yourself who are hosts, and it's to manage the communication between yourself and your guests. And I'd really like to just sit down and talk to you about what some of the problems are that you have. And so when he tried this, he sent out 37 emails, and he got 17 people who responded. So pretty good numbers, right? And from that, he was able to convert a few folks into customers. So this is kind of an approach you want to think about. I just wanted to highlight an example so that you understand how you can sort of combine the two, but really it's about getting in front of them, showing them and talking to them about your idea. And if you have a prototype built, then you can certainly show that off. But if you don't, then at least starting off with a conversation. Now, beyond that, if you are in those early stages, if you are in the stage where you don't have a product and you're really not sure what you should be doing, then this is the time to recruit customers to interview them. And the reason I say this is because, once again, your idea might be fabulous, but they might have very, very different problems. And so when you go in to schedule an interview with these folks, you've got to put aside the problems that you think they have, and instead you've got to really focus on what the problems are that they might actually have, right? So this is not the time for confirmation bias, which is, you have your idea and you're confirming that by asking them, do they have that problem, right? They might have that problem, but it might not be the most acute problem. Or if it's not a problem and you're really just looking for building an experience product, then you've at least got to get a sense of, what their sort of general belief structure is and who they are and what they do. Do they use technology and things like that. This is also the stage where you've got to develop some empathy, because while you may think you are your user, you might be scratching your own itch in building this. You can't really build a business off of just one user, right? So you've really got to think beyond yourself once again and start to understand these folks. And so the type of questions that you want to phrase need to be around pulling from them, what it is their belief structure is, what are their behaviors, and from that you can start to get some patterns, right, of who the folks are and whether or not you think they would be the right fit for you. So I know I'm being a little bit hand-wavy here, and it's intentional because this is actually a pretty deep topic. So I'm going to, politely defer some of this to my email course or to questions that you might have during the Q&A. But really what I would say is if you have not done a single interview yet, then I would encourage you to go out and do an interview, even if it's as limited as 15, 20, 30 minutes. Obviously, the longer the better, but I encourage you to do this before you build a product. And if you've already built a product and you're not seeing customers or the traction that you want, go back and find people to interview, right? Because the core is that you really haven't understood your customer that you're going after and who that person is, which is why you're having trouble attracting them. So doing the interviews is a great way to develop some of that empathy and to really understand who the people are that you may be servicing. It's also a great way to figure out who you don't want to service, right? So that's another reason. Like, don't build a product for people that you might, or a persona that you might find that you're just not interested in. So it's a good way for you to think about that as well. Okay, so when we get started on our idea, another thing that I often mention to folks is we really want to get started and focus on the ideal customer. Now, I'm not saying that you should only service a single customer, or that going forward you should only service a single customer. But what I'm saying is when we get started, it's very, very hard to have a broad base of customers, meaning like a lot of different demographics, personality types, etc. And the reason that it's hard is because people actually have nuanced needs, and they are unwilling to change that behavior initially, right, until they see other people maybe using the product. So when we're just getting started, we have to kind of identify a few folks or a few personas and really dig into what their needs are and build the prototype around those needs. And of course, eventually we want it to be general, we want to grow it, but we've got to start by pinpointing just a couple persona types. And the benefit to doing this is we actually develop a really loyal base of customers who go on to be what's known as our early evangelists. These are the people that adopt the product early, they go on to evangelize your product, and essentially what they're doing is word-of-mouth marketing. And if you haven't come across this, word-of-mouth marketing is one of the most powerful means by which you can acquire customers, because it's a testimonial from another customer, right? People are more likely to believe someone who's like paid you money or used your service than they are of any fancy marketing that you do. And so this is why it's really important to take a step back and identify who your ideal customer is. So the way to do this, a really simple exercise that I want to give you today is for you to actually do a little bit of role playing. If you have a partner or a co-founder, or even if you've got a video camera, sit down and ask yourself questions like, what are some of the beliefs or behaviors that your ideal customer may have? Why do they have those beliefs? How might they react to a product like yours? right? And really dig into that. And if you don't have answers to those questions, you got to go back and do the interviews, right? But kind of doing this role playing where you get into the character of your customer lets you really understand who they are and what their needs are. And it's not about, cramming your product or the problem that you think they have, into a product. It's about really identifying what they have verbalized as the problem, and then you, once again, coming up with a solution for it. So kind of getting into that character helps you do this. So this is the second exercise that I'm giving you. Remember, the first one was the formula. This one is doing this role playing. So I, again, encourage you to do this today or at some point. Pick a partner. You guys can even switch off. But this is a great technique to really get a sense of what it is that you do know about your customer and what you may not know in terms of their needs. The other benefit to doing this is when you can pinpoint the very, very specific needs, then you know what's important, what's a priority, and that's essentially what you can then put into building a prototype, right? A lot of people are always concerned, like, what do I put in a prototype? How many features do I build? If you have a really good sense and you start to spot patterns in what that ideal customer base wants, then that's what the prototype becomes. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. And I'm going to talk about recruiting because this is always a very, interesting topic for people, especially for those of you who are in Silicon Valley, but certainly for those of you who might be on the outside as well. I want to touch upon it because I think, ultimately we have an idea, we can start building it ourselves, but as we start to grow, we have more needs, we need a team, right? It's always best to have a team who's going to help us out. When we hold the idea in, or we think our own product is amazing, or prototype is amazing, it may be, but oftentimes we need someone else to come in and help us refine the product. So I'm going to talk about technical recruiting here. And once again, I'm going to sort of touch upon it, but happy to take deeper questions in the Q&A. So, the first thing I want to encourage is that there is a right time to recruit. A lot of people think, I've got a software idea, I'm not technical, I need to hire a technical co-founder, or I got to look for a dev shop, or I have to go find an engineer. That's actually the worst time to hire somebody. And the reason it's the worst time to hire someone is because you may or may not be committed to your specific idea. And if you haven't validated it through the customer interviews and through the formula and feedback, then it's going to change a lot. And if it's changing a lot, then the last thing you want is to hire an engineer and then have them build a bunch of stuff and scrap it, right? Because the motivation for an engineer is, I want to build, I want to keep building, I want to see my creation come to life, and then I want to hear that people, enjoyed using it, right? So if you're in that constant changing mode, it's not the right time to go out and hire technical talent. When you want to hire technical talent is when you are committed to your idea, like you are personally going to invest your time for the next however many months or years, and you have a vision. It doesn't have to be a perfect vision. It doesn't have to be a big vision. It doesn't have to be mapped out for the next 5 years, but you have to have some sense of what it is, the problem solving is, who your customer type might be, and that you can communicate all of that to somebody else. And having a roadmap is always great. Once again, it doesn't have to be set in stone, but just an idea of like, here's what we need to do for the next 3 to 6 months, right? Engineers, after all, are planners, and so, or at least the best ones are. And the same thing, what I'm saying also goes for designers, any technical-minded person. So don't think it's any way different, but having that roadmap is really key because they need to plan, right? They need to be thinking about how they're going to be building this product from scratch. So that's why I say you need to have these 3 things in place before you consider recruiting. Now, I'm going to put these slides up on SlideShare afterwards, and Women 2.0 folks will also share them. So I'd encourage you to look at the supplemental reading that I've put here below and click on any of these links to kind of get a deeper analysis of why I'm saying these things. All right. So the other thing, much like recruiting customers or attracting customers, recruiting is also a sales process. So I don't want you to think of it as any different from, you trying to get out there and share your idea, you're going to be doing the same thing when it comes to recruiting people. You're going to be selling them on your idea, right? But what do we know that best salespeople do, right? The best salespeople, they don't sell, right? They don't sit there and they don't say like, oh, you've got to like buy this thing. It's amazing. You can't live without it, right? People that do a hard sale, we walk away from them, right? So don't sell. Instead, the best salespeople get you to buy, right? They ask you questions. They're like, what do you like to do? Where do you go? What's important to you, right? They really get into your motivation. They try to understand who you are, and then they're like, I use this thing and it works for me pretty well. Maybe you should give it a shot, right? So they kind of lure you in to what they have. And so that's basically how you want to be thinking about this. Because if you don't, then what you end up doing is you end up hiring somebody and then firing them, or hiring somebody and then hating them, right? So my sincere advice again is think about hiring, as sales again, and you're recruiting or you're attracting somebody to your team, but you've really got to make sure that whatever their needs are being met. And that comes down to things like understanding what types of products they like to build. If they don't like building games, don't recruit them to build your game. They might even have restrictions like, hey, I need to work remotely for a while, or hey, I can't work for sweat equity, I need a little bit of a salary, right? So you've really got to understand what are all their needs, and of course, also get them to buy into what your vision is and have a sense of, is what you're building what they actually want to build. So this is a great quote by Mark Benioff, the co-founder of Salesforce. And what he says is like, the secret to hiring is that you want to look for the people that are going to change the world, right? So while you do care about people's needs, don't forget what your vision is. And this is why, once again, I said you've got to go back and make sure you have some semblance of a vision. It doesn't have to be, fully mapped out, but you've got to have enough so that it's convincing to people. Now, the other thing I want you to think about is when you are recruiting, this is another opportunity to really build your brand, right? Even with those people that you might decide are not the right candidate for you, or are not the right employee for you. And I think there's one story that I want to share with you that's really indicative of that. So a few years ago, at Starbucks, they had a candidate come in. And the candidate came in and they didn't really have a great process in place. They just let the person come in, and I don't think they gave them the best experience. And the candidate went out later, got on social media, and tweeted about the sort of mismanagement practices. And that basically really impacted the Starbucks brand, right? Because after all, this person wasn't just like an employee or candidate coming in. This person was a potential Starbucks customer, and so were all of their, friends and Twitter followers, etc. So the reason I say this is, we can learn a lot from this lesson, which is people that come in, even if we are, two people in a garage, we've still got to be professional. You've still got to let them know that we have some semblance of a recruiting process, and kind of set their expectations and walk them through, what's going to happen when we interview them. Even if you're recruiting your best friend, the rules still apply, right? They're going to want to know, why they should work for you, what it's going to be like, and, what they're going to get out of the experience. So really take this to heart. Think about, recruiting once again as a brand building opportunity. So I've mentioned this before, I'm going to mention it again, right? You really, really want to gauge somebody's interest. Whenever I see an engineer who leaves 3 months, 6 months in, or even a year in, to me, that's a very short-lived time. Having been an engineer at early stage companies, I've definitely stuck around for more than a couple years, most often like 3 to 4 years. So to me, it shows that there isn't enough connection, right? And so you've really got to make sure that they're interested in your product idea, they believe in it to some level, they believe in you as the founder, and that they are, in general, invested in the growth of this company. And if they're not, then you've got to let them do what they want to do, right? Because at the early stages, when you're getting your idea off the ground, right, that's the worst time to have high turnover, because then you're basically stuck, right? If you lose that 1 or 2 engineers that you have, then you're sort of back to square one, especially if you're that non-technical person. So really think about how you can find that person that's going to mesh with you, both in terms of their interests and their needs, but also yours. Now, obviously, I'm sure you care about how to find folks, and what I would say is, for myself, going to events, whether I'm speaking or whether somebody else is speaking, have been one of the best ways to connect with people. Whenever I speak at conferences, people approach me and ask me either if I want to work for them or if they can work for me, right? Because it's a great way to showcase your credibility and other people to showcase their credibility. So I always say, go to as many conferences as possible. And if that's not possible, then think about sponsoring even a meetup, right? There are so many meetups, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area, that happen. And if you can go to them, that's great. But even if you can donate a couple $100 for pizzas and then show up and speak for like 5 minutes and tell people what your company is, that gives you a captive audience, right? And so you've got to put in the time to do some of this offline work. Time and time again, I see founders who complain, oh, I can't find technical talent, I don't know what to do, and then I ask them, have you been to a conference? Have you been to a meetup? Have you even met with another, engineer or designer in the last 5 days? They're like, no, I just kind of was hoping they would show up, right? I mean, even in Silicon Valley, where technical folks are pretty much everywhere, it's very, very difficult, right? So you have to put your effort in, and you've got to meet them halfway, which means going to these types of events. Now, for those of you who may have gone and gotten a little pushback, right, you can't show up and then just recruit, right? This, once again, it's that being that salesperson that's too salesy, right? You've got to certainly thought the events that make sense for you to show up to, and you've also got to okay with the organizer that you're going to talk about your company, and you've also got to talk to the folks that are there as if they're they're human and they have needs and interests, right? So keep that in mind as you are recruiting. But I would strongly encourage you to consider these offline channels. Now, the other is, of course, using online, and I've always had sort of mixed reviews with these, and these are just a few. I would certainly also consider things like Odesk or Elance. But what I've found is, looking through people's code base on GitHub is a great way to check code quality. But sometimes using purely online channels will get you a good pipeline, right? You'll be able to see anywhere from like 5, 10, or 50 candidates in a given week or month. But it's going to take some time for you to weed through all of those and really get to the core of who you're looking for and who is going to be a good match. I would certainly also encourage you to pursue people on Twitter and other social media networks like that. Oftentimes those are the best because they're so actively engaged on them. So use that as a way to create a funnel for yourself to get some candidates in, but it's not going to be a way to close them, right? You still need to do things like follow up and have phone screens, have an interview with them in person, and once again, really dig into their needs. So use these as a way to prospect. All right. So I know after I mention all of this, those of you who may be technical might be thinking, well, I'm not technical, right? So how am I going to know if the person that I'm interviewing is really good? So here are a couple suggestions. The first thing I want you to realize is you don't need to be technical in order to gauge if somebody is high quality, right? Think about a house, right? We all live in either a house or apartment or somewhere. We didn't build it ourselves, right? We had somebody built it for us, and then we trust that we can live in it and it's not going to like fall apart, right? So there is some trust that we put into it. And even if you've gone through the process of building a house yourself, you go out and you hire a contractor, and you probably don't know how to do all the drywalls and stuff like that, but what do? You probably ask the contractor for some references, you give those references a call. You might start them off by saying, like, this is the time frame, this is the budget, right? And then you expect them to do, some work for you. It's the same process when it comes to hiring technical talent, right? You go out, you ask for references, you have those references, you reach out to those references, you make sure that they're recent, and you ask them questions like, does this person write quality code? Did they write code that was, shippable? How often did their code break? Were there bugs in it, right? What's kind of their work ethic? How do they communicate with other people, right? These are all sort of general questions that you can ask to get a sense of how good somebody is in terms of being an employee and in terms of being technical. So don't feel like you can't ask any questions just because you don't know how to code yourself, right? You can certainly do a first pass. And then if you really feel like you're on the fence, then get a technical advisor. Tell them, hey, I'd really like you to run somebody through a technical interview. I'd like to sit in the back and shadow just to get a sense of what it's like, and then have them do that deep dive. Now, if you really feel like, okay, that's maybe something you can do, or maybe you're in an area where you can't find that technical advisor, then what I would say is have them solve a real problem. And by that, I mean give them a small exercise. Give them an exercise that's going to maybe take them a day or a week. When I brought on my BizeeBee co-founder, the first exercise I gave him was just go out and build some graphs for us. And that will take you a week. If it takes you any longer, then I know I'm not going to hire you because you're taking too long. And then let me see how that works, right? So have them solve some real problems. Now, once again, I know when I say this, people are going to be like, well, people are going to think that's free consulting and all this stuff. So if you're concerned, pay them a little something for their time. You don't have to do it with everybody. You can pick sort of your top 1, 2, 3 candidates and have them solve the problem. But that way you've got something tangible, right? You've got a real result. And the more you can sort of narrow the focus of that project, the better. But get working with them if you are really concerned about the quality of their code and as well as their communication skills. But having people work on a real project is a great way to get some of that validation, especially for those of you who are non-technical. All right. So let's move on to the third topic. We've got about 5-10 minutes, and then I'll switch to the Q&A, but I want to cover funding last. So, I know this is always a very heated topic for people, and you're really concerned about how are you going to make money, get funding. And once again, similar to recruiting, I will say that there is a right time to get funding. So what I advise people is in the initial stages, really think about bootstrapping. Right? I know a lot of people were like, well, so-and-so got funding with like vaporware. Like they didn't even have an idea or, all these things. The truth is a lot of times those are serial entrepreneurs. Those are people that have really deep connections to investors. So those are sometimes things that may act against you depending on, where you're located and your background. And there is no shame in bootstrapping. I certainly bootstrap as much as I can. So the way to think about bootstrapping is you can get people to prepay. So remember those customers I talked about that you were attracting? You should convince them to prepay before you built your product, right? This is also a great way to validate your idea. And I know there might be some hangups around that, like, oh, will anybody pay me? And what I want you to think about is, when you go to Amazon, you don't read the book and then pay Amazon afterwards, right? You prepay, and then they deliver the book, sometimes instantaneously to your Kindle, and then you read it, right? And maybe halfway through you're like, oh, I really should have spent that $9.99, right? Fine, you have buyer's remorse, but you're prepaying. So there's enough at this point behavior around prepaying that people are getting comfortable with it. You obviously have to do it as the deadline for the launch gets closer. So you can't do something like 6 months or 9 months or 12 months in advance, or maybe you can, right? Try it out. I won't say that's not possible, but a lot of times the sooner it is to launch, the more likely people are to prepay. And you can also, if you don't have just a software product, but if you've got something physical as well, you could try to use something like Kickstarter and do a crowdfunding campaign. But I do know they have some restrictions around SaaS products, software as a service. So the other way to bootstrap is use a paycheck, right? Get some, if you have savings. There's, once again, no shame in bootstrapping with a paycheck. If you are working your 9 to 5 or however many hours you're working, do that during the day and moonlight or hire somebody to do some of the work while you are working your day job, right? This is certainly great. And once again, for some of those non-technical folks out there, while you're making sure you can make rent, someone else is building your product. So using a paycheck to fund that initial prototype is a great approach. Now, if you're really hell-bent on like, no, I just want to start my company, I want to get going, then I would think about offering some services, right? How can you offer people a opportunity to pay you and to give them something immediately? And a simple example that I bring is with Femgineer. When I got started on the business side, I started by offering an online course, and this was before I even built the course. And so I really just had a landing page. I reached out to my blog readers and some people on my email newsletter and said, I'm doing this course, here's how much it costs, here's what I'm going to offer, and that was a service that I built. Now, over the years, I've started to productize that course, into a book, into a video course, and all this stuff, but it really just began as a service. So think about how you can do the same thing. If you do this, this is also a really great way to kind of continue to do customer research and to get paid to do that customer research. So really think about this tactic. And like I mentioned before, at the bottom there's a blog post I've written. It's pretty exhaustive when it comes to bootstrapping, so take a look at it. All right, so I know this is always a hot topic on people's minds. How do I get investors? And some of you might be going to the Women 2.0 conference and pitching. So I want to kind of prepare you a little bit for that, and then encourage you to go out and attend all the other folks' sessions to get more information on this. So the one thing I will say about reaching out to investors is, the market is moving in a direction where you really, really need to have at least a product, a prototype built if you're a first-time founder, right? If you've been a serial entrepreneur, if you've had an exit, or you have a strong network, you might be able to go in and raise with just an idea. But for the rest of us, you really need to have a product, at least a prototype. And you've got to have some, again, semblance of a team. Whether it's a co-founder, whether it's advisors, whether it's some technical folks working with you, that's kind of up to you. But you need to have at least a team in place so that people see that other people want to come and work on your idea as well. And then having some customers, right? Even if it's just 3 people who are paying for your product, that can be a great source of validation, especially if it's like an enterprise. Having 3 customers is amazing. So have some customer validation and know who that customer is inside and out so that you can convey that to investors. So once again, I would strongly advise you to have these 3 things in place before you even consider going out and raising significant capital. Even if you're doing a friends and family round, a lot of times you want to have these 3 things in place. All right? So when I also talk about funding, I want you to think about accelerators, because for some of you who might have that free product and you're really thinking, well, it's going to take me a lot of capital and I don't have that savings, or I'm pretty new to this whole process, think about some accelerators out there who will give you a little bit of that startup capital, right? It might require you to do a little bit of a sales pitch to them, right? You're going to have to pitch your idea, but a lot of accelerators are good at giving you a little bit of seed capital and making longer-term introductions to investors. So if you don't have that investor network, another great opportunity. I didn't mention this before, but I'm actually an entrepreneur in residence at 500 Startups, and we're getting ready to scout for our batch that's coming up in October. So for any of you out there who are considering something like 500, I'm happy to take a look at your product and your company. And of course, there's a number of accelerators out there. There's some that are more local. Also here in the Bay Area, there's Y Combinator. There are some women accelerators. So I'd encourage you to take a look at all of those and find the one that really fits for you, and to understand what it is that they want in return, right? Because it's not just like they're going to give you money. They're going to take some equity, and there are some expectations for what they want you to accomplish when they're in your program, when you're in their program. All right. So I just want to highlight one example of someone that I thought was really great. This is a student of mine, Alyssa Ravazio. She is the founder of HipCamp. So for all of you camping aficionados out there, especially in California, if you are struggling with booking a campsite, I would highly recommend going out and checking out HipCamp. So the reason I wanted to bring up Alyssa is because she came to me about a year ago, and she took my lean product development class, and she built her prototype during that course, and then afterwards went on to launch it and spent about a year bootstrapping it, got some initial customers on board, had some revenue, and then most recently, went out and raised $1 million of angel investment. And so she really took a good amount of time, not a huge amount of time, but a decent amount of time to really think about her idea, really build it, and then was able to get the investors to support her. So, a great example of someone who can do it. So I want you to realize that you can as well. But just want to kind of dig into Alyssa as an example. All right, so just want to do a quick recap, and then we'll jump into Q&A. So remember, the first thing I talked about is if you've got an idea, don't get too caught up on judging it. Really think about how you're going to get out there and share it. You're going to want to refine it, and use that formula for any idea that you have, right? Whether it's a big one or a small one, or your 5th one or your 10th one. And then once that's done, really start to get in front of some customers. Start with your network and reaching out from there. And then if you haven't yet, schedule some interviews. Really start to understand who these folks are that you want to service, and then drill down into who your ideal customer is that you want to get started with. And then, it'll expand from there, but you've really got to narrow it down first. And then I talked about recruiting a technical team, right? There is a right time to recruit, and that right time is when you're committed, you have some vision in place, and you've got a little bit of a roadmap, even if it's just the next 3 to 6 months. And if it changes a little bit, that's okay, but you've got to have enough so that the engineer or the designer that comes on board is going to feel like their work and their effort is going to see the light of day, right? That they're just not going to constantly be pulled in a variety of directions, or they're just going to be sort of stuck changing all the time, right? They want to see their creation come to life. And then the final is when you decide to get funding, much like the others, there is a right time. And for most of us out there who are first-time founders, it's about having at least a prototype. It's having a team in place. And it's also about having some customer validation, even if it's just a handful of customers who are paying us. All right? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and switch to Q&A, but I just have one quick announcement. So the first, again, is if you enjoyed this, I know I kind of went through a lot of material, but you might feel like you want more. So I dig into these concepts a lot deeper in my email course, and you can sign up for that by August 31st. So check that out. And then I'll be speaking at the Women 2.0 conference again, September 30th to October 1st. So I encourage you to come out to that, and feel free when you're there to reach out to me. I'll also be doing a session on some more topics similar to this one, but I'll pick a few different ones for those of you who might be here and come to the conference as well. All right. So let's go ahead and switch gears and start taking some questions. Okay, so first question is there a correct process to follow when you're building a team? How do you decide they'll add value to your idea? What should we look for? Okay, this is a great question, and there's a couple questions here, so I'm going to kind of take each one. Let's start with the first one. Is there a correct process to follow when you're building a team? So there's not really, right or wrong. Whenever you're a first-time founder, you sort of have to be okay with making mistakes, right? So don't feel like, oh my gosh, I have to do it this way, like I have to do the way Poornima said, right? You don't have to think in those terms. What I want you to think about, though, is when you're building a team, there are some components, right? So the first is obviously, what do you need? Like, you need an engineer and you need a designer, then that makes sense. But if you want things like, hey, I want a contract to hire people, or I want to have a remote team, or I want everyone to come to my retreat a year, right? Those are things that you can do. That's the freedom you have as the founder. When I say, there should be sort of a process, what I mean by that is, like, you have some work for these folks to do, and you are taking the time to, interview them. You're taking the time to look through their referrals. You're not just taking the first person that comes to you and says, I know how to write code, or I know how to design, pretty things, right? So it shouldn't be that simple. You should dig into their background, dig into their interests, and also make sure they understand what it is that you are doing and what you want to accomplish. So I would say that is really the starting process for building a team. And then you also want to make sure that the team is very complementary. And by that, what I mean is, like, you don't need to hire 3 designers to begin with. Maybe eventually you need 3 designers, but to begin with, maybe you need 1 designer. Maybe you need somebody who can design just your logo, right? That's all you need right now. So maybe you contract to hire them first. Then maybe later on you need somebody who's going to actually come in and build the landing site and the product, right? You can do it incrementally, but really also dig into what are people's skills, and are there ways in which you can hire people to complement those skills. So some people might have strengths, and then they might have weaknesses, right? So if they have weaknesses, let them own up to it, and then look for others who can sort of complement those weaknesses with their strengths. So the other question that you asked was, how do you decide they'll add value to your idea, and what should we look for? So when it comes to adding value, right, some founders are a little bit more aggressive or liberal, I don't know what the right word is, but sometimes they're like, oh, they need to add value by working for sweat equity. They need to prove that they're just amazing, and that they're going to add value. Not everybody is willing to do that. And what you need to decide is, what's the benchmark for you, right? So if you want something accomplished, right, then adding value is getting the thing done, right? And so you've got to look for the people who are going to get things done. If adding value is building something that's high quality to you, or anticipating needs, or taking the time to understand the customer, right? Think about that. It's ultimately you setting up the criteria for how you think somebody's adding value, right? So if somebody is even pushing you, some people love that. They like to hire people that are going to push them or going to challenge them, then that's a way of adding value, right? But you need to think about what you need and what your company needs and what your product needs, and write those characteristics down, and then look for people. And of course, you have your gut to use to figure out who's not adding value, right? Who's stopped adding value, and that's the time where you have to have a serious conversation and decide where to go next, right? Whether they're no longer going to be part of the team, or they need some motivation, or they need to work on something else. All right, so hopefully this answers your question. Feel free to ask a follow-up question if that's not sufficient. I'm going to move on to the next one from Aisha. I hope I'm saying your name right. When does it get absolutely necessary to educate yourself on the technical front, learn to code, etc., before recruiting others in that area? Well, it's actually never necessary. I mean, you want to have a sense of that there is a process for software building, right? Which means you have an idea, you create some mock-ups, you then take those mock-ups to customers, you get some of that feedback, you then translate that into like a high fidelity, meaning like a Photoshop file, and then that gets translated into code, and you have to test your code, and then you have to push it out. So you have to kind of know the general process, so that as a non-technical person, you're not sitting there wondering why it's taking somebody so long to build what you want them to build, right? But you don't need to learn code, right? I always want to stress this so many times. Like, honestly, as a technical person, I don't know how to do accounting. And I'm not going to learn accounting. In fact, I don't care. All I care about is how much money we're making, how much money we're spending, right? That's as plain and simple. So I don't take the time to go out and learn every little thing in order to run my business or my company. I hire people to do that, and then I basically say, like, at the end of the day, you need to translate this into terms that I understand, right? So with my accountant, it's once again, how much money have we made? How much money have we spent? Hopefully it's in the positive. If it's not, then we need to figure something out, right? And similarly with other areas. I do some marketing, but I leave most of the marketing up to the marketers, right? So you've got to be comfortable with what you don't need to know. Once again, I would say, like, if you want to be an engineer, if you want to code, then go out and learn how to code. If you have no desire and you're happy with your idea and you have other skills, if you're great at sales, if you're great at marketing or business development or even accounting, right, whatever it is, right, focus on that and then hire for your weaknesses or hire for the areas that you are deficient and find people to do that. Okay? All right, I'm going to pause here and wait for some more questions. Okay, Sophia asks, when does the consideration of scale up come into the process? Okay, this is a good question. So I'll kind of take a step back. So scaling means a lot of different things. Scaling means we need to scale our team. Scaling means we need to scale our product. Scaling means we need to scale some of our internal process, right? So when you think, so I'm going to limit the conversation to product because I'm assuming that's what you mean. But if you want to follow up and ask me the other areas, that's fine too. So when I say scaling the product, right? You need to have at least some customer validation. Once again, this comes back to you have launched your product, people are signing up for it, people are, if you have a paid model, people are paying for it, and you're now in a position where you're seeing people come in regularly. The number kind of depends on how much marketing you've done and all of that, but you should generally see a trend where people are interested, right? And once that happens, then you can think about scaling, meaning going out and acquiring more customers. You may do more marketing, you might do more sales, right? But you need to have some validation in place from those early adopters. If you don't have that validation in place and you just try to go out and scale, meaning raise capital, start doing marketing, then you're not going to have the right message and you don't have the right product. Right? So you've really got to have some of that early validation, and I realize this is a little bit hand-wavy. It's actually a little bit hard to say, right? I couldn't tell you if that was 5 customers or 10 customers or 200 customers. It also comes down to the market, right? Like I said before, if you're an enterprise, if you're doing a B2B, 5 to 10 customers may be huge for you. If you're doing something like consumer internet, 5 to 10 customers is like your best friends, right? So you've got to have more. You've got to have thousands. And so that's how you have to be thinking about it. But there should be some element of, okay, I've tried to acquire customers through these few channels, so I know that there's interest there. I can't afford to acquire anymore, so I've got to go raise capital. I've got to scale. Okay? So hopefully that answers your question. But like I said, happy to follow up if I haven't. Okay, so Tamara asked the question, I've seen some accelerators with restrictions on revenue. Is this common from what you have seen with accelerators, or do you think most would like to see you have a product, team, and customer validation? Yeah, at this stage, accelerators are pretty new to the market. I've seen them come in since 2010, and I know they've been around before that, like Y Combinator's been around for quite a long time. But the concept of revenue and sort of these restrictions may be unique to some accelerators. So that's why I say it's best to talk to the accelerator and ask them what their criteria is, and then honestly ask them who the last 5 companies were that went through their program, and contact those founders, right? Hopefully at least one or two of them will respond to you, and ask them, where were they, right? Did they have a product? Did they have a team? Did they have some customers? Did they have revenue? What stage were they at? Because that will give you a better sense then of who benefited from the program and what was involved in the program. So try that approach, But no, there's not like a hard and fast rule that everybody needs to have revenue. I've also seen some more incubators where people go in and they might just have an idea. They might not have even a product built yet, but because the people that are coming are engineers, they know they're capable of building, right? So that's kind of the validation to let them in. So you've really got to kind of dial into the accelerator and ask them. All right, hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so you guys are asking great questions, so I'm hoping to get to all of them. So Cynthia asks, how do I decide if I should make the technical people be a co-founder or just hire him or her? This is a great question. I've been talking a lot about this topic of like partnering and stuff, so check out the Femgineer blog for the last couple of weeks, but I will answer your question right now. So to me, you know, a co-founder is somebody who is really invested in your idea and gets it and is going to be there for the long term. I'm not saying that an employee won't be that kind of person, but it's somebody that you really trust who, in your absence, is essentially going to run the company, right, in a good way. And so if you don't have that level of trust yet, then hire the person as an employee, and then you can always give them the title of co-founder later. What you cannot do is take it back, right? You can't give somebody the title of co-founder and be like, no, you're no longer my co-founder, now you're my employee, right? Nobody demotes people and then sort of has a happy relationship afterwards, right? So if you hire somebody on the technical side and you feel like you're just not sure what their level of technical expertise is and if they can really grow into the role long term, then tell them, like, look, and if they're pushing you for the co-founder title, then tell them, like, look, I don't feel comfortable yet. Let's work together. Let's see how it goes. And then I'm happy to have the conversation again, you know, in 6 months to a year. But that always, or in most cases, that works better, like I said, rather than giving somebody the title and then deciding, like, that wasn't the right person for you, right? So don't feel like you need to start off the bat with every technical person and be like, will you be my technical co-founder, right? Because some people, it may be pretty junior level. They may be able to build, but they're not going to be able to do things like scale the product or recruit other engineers or, you know, really dig into all the other things that the product needs. So keep that in mind and be cautious about it. All right, I believe this is Shina. Once again, I apologize if I butcher your name. So she asked the question, when recruiting a technical person, how do you pay if you don't have enough funding yet? Awesome. So this is, once again, why bootstrapping is important, right? If you're going to pay somebody, then, and you can't afford them, right? I think you should be honest with people and just say, like, look, this is pretty much all I can afford. This is the budget I have, even if it's a couple $100s, right? Whatever it is, wherever you are, I always find if you tell people, like, look, this is the stage I'm at, I'm really putting in my own savings, or I'm working and I'm doing this, and people are more understanding, right? If you just raise funds, you have $1 million in the bank, then people are going to be like, you can't pay me. That's when they're going to get a little bit confused. But if you are really early, right, and you can pay them even a little bit, then I would consider it. But if you really can't pay them, then you need to set up some form of a contract and say, like, okay, this is how much equity that you're going to get in exchange for doing X, Y, and Z. And this has to be in a contract. Because I've seen too many folks that just say, like, oh yeah, I gave them like X% of the company and I told them that, and then kind of walk away and then wonder why, you know, everything sort of fell apart later, right? So it's okay to pursue the avenue of sweat equity, right? Having people really just get equity for the work that they do, but you want to make sure that they understand why, like the position you're coming from. And if they need to be paid, then negotiating them and saying with them and saying, like, look, this is all I can afford at this stage. All right. Okay, let's see. Grady asks, how do you find developers to create an MVP? I have my idea designed and the entire front end built myself, but I need a developer, not a partner, to get the MVP made. All right, awesome. Well, congratulations, Grady, on designing it yourself and building it yourself. So what I would say is at this stage, if you're not looking for a partner, you're not looking for someone to bring on full time, you might actually want to go and look at a site like Dribbble or even on people's GitHub accounts or on Twitter or Elance or Odesk and a few others like CoderWall. There's like so many, it's hard to name them all. But I would say like go actually find a freelance developer, go look for a contractor and have them work with you on your prototype. And while they're doing that, right, you want to make sure they're doing things like best practices, they're setting up some testing, you know, you pick the framework that someone else can pick up and it's well known, so something like Rails or Python using Django. But yeah, it's totally fine to hire somebody just for a limited project to build your MVP. So I would start there, and like I said before, use some of the online systems or online places to go and recruit a developer just for that contract period. All right. Okay, Andrea asks, what if you have an idea for a specific problem and know that software could be the solution, but you're not sure how to find out what the software should be? Okay, I realize this answer is really probably going to irritate you, Andrea, but this is why you should take my email course, because I actually talk about this very specific topic, right? Because a lot of times you might have an idea and you need to then go out and do things like create paper prototypes, put them out in front of people. Really, when we talk about software, we're talking about a couple things. We're talking about connecting people in the form of like a social network or a marketplace. We're talking about automation, right? Rigorous processes that people do, you know, like things that they have to just, you know, automate essentially. Or computational things, right? Like all the big data problems we have. Those are some of the applications that we want to use software for. So you might actually have a problem that you may be able to solve without software. Or maybe you can initially solve it without software, but then to scale, you really need something like software, right? So these are some of the nuances that I cover in my email course. But typically, you know, your idea needs to be a solution for a problem that requires automation, some way of connecting, or some way of connecting humans, or, you know, something that requires a lot of computation. And that's typically why people, you know, use software. Also for entertainment, right? If it's a game, that's also fine. But, you know, those are some of the top 4 applications of software. All right, I know I'm kind of rushing through these because I don't know how long we've got left. I'm hoping Justin will poke me and tell me when to stop. All right, so Lucci85 asks, you earlier mentioned that you partly funded one of your ventures through building an online service. What is the best way to build a customer base for maximum profitability, particularly if one doesn't have a strong online presence? I think you answered your own question. So if you don't have an online presence and you are building an online business, you need to start by building an online presence, right? It's just, I mean, you can do some offline tactics, like the example I gave with my friend Quinton. I would certainly encourage you to start there. But if you're going to maximize profitability, right, if you really want to scale this, you've got to think about setting up an online presence, right? And that means having a landing page, having some presence on social media, doing a little bit of content marketing. I mean, how much is up to you? I know whenever I say content marketing, people are like, I don't want to write, so I'll leave that up to you. But and maybe it's not writing, right? Maybe it's YouTube, maybe it's a podcast, but you need to have something. And the final thing I'll say is, if you're going to build an online presence, you need to do it consistently, right? You can't just set up a website and then sit back, right? You've got to nurture it. Same thing with an email newsletter. You've got to nurture it. I send out my newsletter, rain or shine, every Wednesday. I have missed a couple because of the book that I'm writing, but pretty much, you know, keep it going. All right. So I'm getting the boot. I appreciate all of you for being online today. I hope you've gotten a lot out of this. Feel free to ping me on Twitter. Please come to the conference if you can make it. And I'll, again, encourage you to sign up for the email course so that, you know, some of the questions that I wasn't able to kind of dig into, you'll get more answers to them. All right, have a good Friday. Bye.